Hello everyone, welcome to this video on how to study for step 1. We're going to go through how to create a schedule, what resources to use, what practice tests to take, and what you should be aiming for to get a pass on this exam. Alrighty, so before you can begin studying, you really do need to sit down and make a schedule. I designed my schedule around November to December of my M2 year with the plan to test in April. First, let's go over the order that you want to go through your content. The order I went through my content is listed on the left side. I tried to design it around the classes we were taking concomitantly, so that way I wouldn't have to review these concepts twice. So for example, my class was going through the MSK system and then reproduction. So I first listed the MSK system and then later on repro. And then after I did the MSK, I listed some topics I had difficulties with, such as immunology, hemonc. So that's kind of how I would go through it. I would try to start overlapping things with the classes that you're taking in school so you don't have to study things twice, and then begin with studying in between the hardest topics. So whatever it is that you struggled with your M1 and M2 year. Now, how do you design a schedule now that you know the order that you want to study things? You can do it a couple ways. You can either create a general list on Google Excel, on Excel in general, or on Google Docs. I had a little bit of trouble doing that because I really wanted to go video by video. So I used at the time what was called Cram Fighters. This was in 2021. Cram Fighters allowed me to individually click on every single video from every single platform and resource utilized by medical students and design it into my day. And if I missed something that day, it really allowed me to resort everything for the next couple months. And I found that very, very helpful if I fell behind, which honestly I fell behind quite frequently. Cram Fighters has since been bought out by Blueprint, which I've screenshotted below. I personally have not used Blueprint, but from my understanding, it's pretty similar features. The color coordination indicates the different types of platforms, whether it's Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, First Aid, Anki, etc. And these platforms are quite helpful. They are on the pricier side. You'll have to check their websites for up-to-date prices. However, at the time I looked at on Reddit for coupon codes and they were pretty plentiful, so I found that to be very helpful. Whether you design your schedule to be video by video, play by play, or just generally, I'm going to spend a week doing all my MSK system, isn't really important. You can do whatever you think works best for you, whatever's worked best for you in the past. And again, just for reference, I started reviewing content in about November and I finished it around March when I wanted to test in April. So now we're going to go through the common preclinical resources and how to use them for step 1. This is going to be both a combination of my own advice and experiences and also the experiences that my friends that had some of these resources had. Additionally, I don't want you to think that you need all these resources. You actually should not be using all these resources. I'm just going to tell you what I think each of these resources is best used for, and you can kind of pick and choose which ones you're going to need or which ones you're going to review based on what you already have. Or based on what you really need to improve on in terms of your knowledge. Alright, so for my Anki lovers, especially those that use Anking or Lightyear or another large deck like that, you might be getting to the point of your board studying year where you're getting overwhelmed with the amount of cards you have to do every day. I remember M1 year I was doing anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 cards a day, and realistically that wasn't possible for me during the months leading into my step 1 exam. So I'm kind of going to go over how you can best utilize Anki if you're unable to maintain the load you were maintaining before to help you prepare. So I think of it kind of in a tiered system. I think most important is to do the cards that you missed in prior practice questions. I call these my missed question cards. I can go over in another video how to do it, and the Anking has a great video on how to do it as well. But basically, missed question cards are cards you've tagged as missed, and you can filter them out into a separate deck every day or manually put them in a separate deck. Those are the cards I prioritize doing every day because it's okay, in my opinion, to miss a question once, but missing the same question over and over again should not be happening, especially leading into step 1. So when I was doing my Anki daily, I prioritized doing my missed questions. That was anywhere from like 100 to 200 cards a day, but it was definitely more manageable load. Next, I would consider prioritizing your sketchy bugs and drugs cards. You can get these from the Anking deck or from the Lightyear deck or the Pepper deck or whatever deck it is you used. And even if you don't use sketchy and you learn how to do micro and farm in another manner, I would still recommend doing Anki for the bugs and drugs in particular. These kinds of questions on the step 1 exam are very gimme questions, meaning they're very easy to get if you know them, but if you don't know them off the bat, it's going to, 1, waste time, and 2, you're just going to be guessing. So I kind of went in this tiered system. I prioritized number one, my missed questions. Number two, doing the sketchy micro and farm cards. Again, whether or not you use sketchy is unimportant. Just make sure you're doing those cards and you're solidifying your concepts. The friends that I had that had to push their step exam or really had trouble passing closer to their board exam was because they didn't have a good grasp of farm and micro, which are very much memorization based. These other three things I've listed here, and I can link them in the description box, but they're pretty high yield decks. So number one is the Door and 100 Concepts deck. You can find the deck on Reddit, but basically these are a couple hundred anatomy cards, and it's the most high yield anatomy you need to know for the step one exam. I entered medical school in 2020 when anatomy was completely virtual, and so truthfully didn't have a great grasp of anatomy, and this deck really helped me solidify the important anatomy that you need to know for the test. The majority of the anatomy questions I got on my practice tests and on the actual test, truthfully, came from this deck. So after doing, a few hundred cards, I was really only doing about 10 to 15 cards a day in the month or two leading into my exam. Most of the questions I got were from that deck, and honestly, if a question I got didn't come from that deck, I didn't think it was worth learning anyways. Remember, we're trying to pass, we're not trying to get a 270, which doesn't exist anymore. The ADY Tum Dweller deck is another deck that I will link in the description box. This is a deck that somebody created for Pixarize in particular, but what I loved about it is every Pixarize video was max 3 to 15 cards max. I would say. And again, whether you use Pixarize isn't as crucial as the content that this deck has. What I use this deck for in particular, and we'll discuss it on the Pixarize section, is the metabolic pathways that we probably forgot from biochem, and the high yield diseases that have a lot of random associations. Again, like neurofibromatosis 1, neurofibromatosis 2, tuberous sclerosis, the different types of lysosomal storage diseases. These cards, whether you use Pixarize or not, this deck is free, and it really allowed me to solidify those really high yield concepts in a pretty quick and fast way. The first aid rapid review, I'll link the deck below, is basically Anki cards for the last section of the first aid book. The last section of the first aid book is dedicated to having high yield associations. So if you see this buzzword, what is this? If you see this lab value, what is it? And somebody so nicely and graciously created an Anki deck for it to allow you to really get through those cards. I personally did not utilize this deck as frequently, but I had a lot of friends that did. I personally just used my first aid book, covered the answers, and went through it in that manner because I was getting Anki overload at that point. So that's kind of how I would go through my Anki. Again, prioritizing missed questions and then prioritizing your sketchy micro and farm, and then these high yield decks as well. I did have chances to go through my old cards that I had as well, but truthfully, again, I kind of gave up on it as the months went on. And reassuringly, once you get to step 2 and your third year cards, the majority of your step 1 cards are not included in the step 2 deck, and so you will actually suspend the majority of it. So at the end of my step 1 period, I had about 3,000 cards overdue that I had not done. And when I suspended all the step 1 cards that were not in the step 2 deck, I only had 80 cards due. So that was very reassuring and great to see. So now we're going to go through how to use UWorld. While I told you that I don't really think you need to buy all of these resources, this is the one resource I would 100% recommend you get. I completely think it's necessary. I hope that your medical school covers it. So when should you start doing UWorld? There was this old philosophy that a lot of people would do all of UWorld twice. And while I think that's totally valid and fair, I don't really think that's necessary anymore given that step 1 is pass fail now. So I started UWorld in January as soon as possible, and that was for reference when I tested in April. So that gave me a couple months to go through everything. My goal was to get through all of the UWorld questions. There was a couple thousand at the time. I think I got through everything but the last few hundred, which wasn't entirely necessary by the end of it. I think I got through the 90-something% of the bank. More importantly, I think it's how you go through your UWorld questions and how you review them. How to go through UWorld blocks, in my opinion, this is necessary. I'm someone that gets test anxiety. I get really nervous when tests come, and I blank out a lot of the time. And so I think this method really, really helps me cinch down my test taking skills. So it's really all down to content. So how to go through the UWorld blocks. I think you need to do them timed. Do the option that you do not get to see the answers until the end. Make sure every block is 40 questions. And do every single subject mixed together. Unless you haven't covered a subject with your class yet, then you don't need to click on that. But why am I doing it like this? So one, the actual step 1 exam is timed. So I think getting used to pacing yourself, getting used to timing yourself is really essential to allow you to get used to the overall pace of the real exam. 40 questions, I put that because one, that's the max you can do, and two, the step 1 exam is 8 blocks of 40 questions each. So after starting with, doing 1 block a day, and then after a little bit of time, I would do 2 blocks a day. By the end of my study period, I was doing 3 time blocks a day. The actual step exam felt like nothing, right? It's just 8 blocks of UWorld, easy, back to back. You need to mix everything because you really need to get used to thinking of all the subjects. If I only click on the cardio cards and I get a question where somebody has shortness of breath, I'm immediately going to know it's a cardio question, right? But that's not true in real life, and that's not true on the exam. If somebody has shortness of breath, you shouldn't just be thinking of cardio, you should also be thinking of respiratory and other systems as well. So I really, really do recommend doing timed, do not show the answers until the end, 40 questions, mix everything. You're going to bomb the questions at first. I'm talking 10 to 20% at the beginning. I did notice after I hit maybe 15 to a little more percent of the UWorld questions total, I did get a big score jump. And then again after the 50% mark as well, because then a lot of the concepts start repeating themselves. The step 1 exam, it does have some zebras in there, but the majority of the exam is pretty high yield. So as you get your high yield down, as you get to know how to review questions better, your scores are going to go up as well. And so next, it's important to discuss how do you review your questions. You could take notes on every single question if you want, but that is quite tedious, and truthfully, you're probably not going to review them. I remember I screenshotted every question and I typed them all on Google Doc. I didn't review it once. So the way that I would consider reviewing them looking back and how I reviewed them for step 2 is doing that missed question method we talked about. So go to your Anking deck or make the card yourself if the Anking deck doesn't have it, based on the concept you got wrong. When you get a question wrong, it's for a couple reasons. It's either it was a silly mistake, or you were going too fast, or there was one reason you didn't get the question right. Even if it was a 3-layer question, there's one reason you didn't get the question right, or you just didn't know the content at all, in which case, go back to first aid or boards and beyond. But once you figure out why you got the question wrong, unsuspend that Anki card, or make an Anki card, and titled it as a missed question, so that way you continually review it. In that Anki card is where I would screenshot the high yield UWorld diagrams or the question itself for later review. And then again on the side, I did have a screenshot of all the really high yield UWorld diagrams. Sometimes I also referenced first aid or the original Boards and Beyond video or the Boards and Beyond notes if I really, really had trouble and couldn't remember the context of the question overall. And then with regards to how much UWorld I was doing every day, I started in January and I finished a few weeks before the test date to give me enough time to do practice tests as well. I calculated how much I would need to do per day, about 5 or 6 days a week. And that came out to about 1 to 3 blocks a day. I started doing 1 block timed 40 questions, no answers per day, and then I upped it to 2. And eventually, I think like the month leading into it, I was doing 3 blocks a day. So next we're going to get into talking about Sketchy, and again, I'm going to talk more about the content rather than the resource, but very high yield for the step 1 exam is bugs and drugs, bugs and drugs, bugs and drugs. So this is going to be your micro and your form. You really, really, really need to get this down pat. I found the most helpful resource as a visual person to be Sketchy. However, I had plenty of friends that really did not like this resource, and so they found their content in first aid by just rote memorizing the page. I had some friends that utilized a farm textbook instead. Whatever you need to do to get this information into your brain, do it. It is incredibly high yield. It will be the difference between passing and failing. You cannot get through this test, and you really cannot get through your step 2 exam without having a solid concept and grasp of these topics. You're going to see questions come up on it on UWorld. Get the information into your head however it is you need to get them. I'm a very big advocate of Anki. We can go over in another video the high yield settings so you don't get burnt out, but please make sure you do the Sketchy Anki or just any farm and micro deck or notes that you need to get this information really, really solid into your brain. All right, so another pretty high yield topic is the biochem metabolic pathways and the random diseases that we talked about earlier. What do I mean when I say random diseases? Because this is a word I'm making up. I mean the diseases that have a million associations, like neurofibromatosis 1, neurofibromatosis 2, von Hippel-Lindau, tuberous sclerosis, lysosomal storage diseases, etc., etc. You really need to get these down. They're quite high yield. And the biochem metabolic pathways, like, the Cori cycle, the Krebs cycle, etc., unfortunately, these will show up on the test and they will have pretty common associations, and you really want to get these questions right because, again, they're rote memorization. They're quite easy to get. So there's a couple ways you can do it. Again, one is rote memorization. Pull out your first aid textbook, cover the answers, go through it a billion times. Step number 2, you could go through the Anki deck, just find a deck that goes through these pathways and these diseases, rote memorize. I actually found Pixarize to be quite helpful for this. In a similar way as Sketchy, they do use a pretty cute, silly image to help you memorize these pathways. And having those images in my mind really, really helped me for step 1. And after watching the image once, the videos once, I actually kept it in my brain for step 2 and the PEDS exam and the IM exam. So whatever it is you need to do to get these biochem metabolic pathways and these diseases in your mind, get them in your mind. I don't care if it's Anki, I don't care if it's first aid, a textbook, Pixarize. You just need to make sure you have those down. On a similar note, you might ask, do I need to review cell biology? Truthfully, no, you do not. That was the one topic I absolutely did not study. I used my knowledge from college to get those questions. If I got them right, great. If I didn't, it's fine. It was pretty low yield. I find the biochem topics to be much higher yield than the cell biology topics. So that's one way you can cut back on your study time overall. And for my friends that are big boards and beyond and Pathoma lovers, the big question remains, do you need to redo all of it? My answer would be no. Truthfully, I do think it's a waste of time to rewatch all of the videos that hopefully you watched during your M1 year. What I will say is, for if you do have a subscription to these platforms, I would kind of consider one or the other. Again, Boards and Beyond is going to cover everything you need to know from every topic, both physio, path, farm, micro, all of it. Pathoma, though, does a phenomenal job of walking you through all of the high yield pathology in a really succinct way, and a subscription to him actually gets you the book as well, from my understanding. That would be the best way to get the pathology in your mind. So anyways, again, you do not need both. You do not need either. Truthfully, the first aid textbook goes through all of them, but you really need to know yourself and how you study. So what I will say, if you do have these subscriptions and if you do want to go through them, you do not need to necessarily watch every video again. I would consider rewatching the videos for things you don't remember. For example, cards is pretty tough. Renal is pretty tough. You could rewatch the videos for those. But for psych, for example, you could just read the slides. Boards and Beyond, Dr. Ryan actually posts his slides free online, so you could just go through them or go through the first aid book and say, I know it, I know it, I know it, I know it, I don't. Let me read this real quick. I know it, I know it, I know it. So the first aid USMLE Step 1 book, I would say, is something that's worth investing in. I think it's like $40 on Amazon. It's something I went through and referenced and reviewed countless times throughout both M1 and M2 year. You don't have to be a textbook person to like this book. Again, I did not read it page to page, cover to cover, but I did reference it for topics that I didn't know well because I just always had it on hand. I did have it color coordinated. I wrote down UWorld concepts I was missing in it so I didn't miss it again. And like I said, I'm a visual person. A lot of their diagrams are very, very helpful, and they include really helpful mnemonics in it as well, that I do find helpful throughout the step studying period. Again, the end of the book includes the rapid review, so really high yield points that you should be getting right, you should really know by the end of your study period. So I do think this is a really great reference guide. I did have some friends that read it cover to cover, and that really, really helped them because they learn best by reading. So again, know yourself, know what resources are going to help you. This one's available on Amazon and it'll ship to you pretty quickly. I do recommend chopping off the spine and spiral binding it if your school helps you do that or allows that. It'll just save the longevity of it. I had a lot of friends throw it in their backpacks and they were destroyed by the end of their study period. This is a great resource, not just for step 1, but I also use it during my rotations here and there. So when should you take the test? I'll tell you about what I did and then probably in hindsight how I would change it. Again, I was the first year to take the pass-fail step exam. So I took it about a month and a half after our classes ended. Our classes ended in May. I took the test at the end of April. I felt pretty prepared the couple weeks leading into it, and I was going to bring my test up sooner, but I ended up getting pretty sick, so I decided not to change my test. So again, I studied for about a month and a half after the end of class with regards to when I was taking practice tests. So that month and a half, I was exclusively taking practice tests, and I was doing content from November on and into a little bit of March as well. So in hindsight, I don't think I needed that much time. I do not think I needed to spend that much money on practice tests. I think if you could do it for a month, you're fine. I had people do it less than a month. I had people take more than a month. So it's really going to be up to you and what you think you need and what's best. Again, half the test is knowing your content, your high yield content, and then the other half of the test is just really feeling confidence and feeling comfortable with the test taking strategies. So now let's talk about what practice tests you should take, when you should take them, etc. Practice makes perfect. So on top of doing UWorlds pretty daily, religiously, until maybe like the month leading into your exam. You also need to schedule in time to take your practice exams. These are the practice exams I took. Again, in hindsight, not necessary at all. I was the year that step one went pass fail, so a lot of people I know kind of overdid it with terms of studying. And I'll mention about kind of what I would do differently. We'll go through each test that I took and what I thought on it. This is exactly when I took my tests and exactly when I took each practice test, so that way you have a better idea of how to schedule your own tests. I recommend doing maybe one test a week, maybe every other week. That's kind of what I did. I think doing two in 1 week is quite overwhelming, but you do what's best for you and what's best for your schedule in terms of like when you actually take your test versus when I took it. So now let's go through exactly what tests I took and what I thought of all of them. Again, you do not need to and you should not take all of these practice tests, but I wanted to run you through what I thought of each one so you can pick and choose which test that you want to take. Again, sometimes people want to take a really difficult practice test so they can see exactly how hard it can get, especially if they're already doing well. And sometimes people just need a really easy test to kind of get their mojo going, their confidence up. And that's kind of how I wanted to end things in hindsight. But again, there wasn't a lot of information at the time. For reference, these are the practice tests that were out in 2021 when I studied. So NBME 25, all the NBMEs are going to be on their website. You have to pay for all of them. They did like a bundle option last year. So if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely consider bundling and saving money. So NBME 25, again, it's no longer offered, but just for reference, I thought it was kind of out of date. I wouldn't really do this one. Again, in hindsight, I didn't take this test. I had some other friends take this test, and they said it looked nothing like the newer practice tests. So that's why they probably phased it out since then. NBME 26, I don't even remember this test or if I took it. So that should tell you what I thought of it. Again, it's on the older side. The lower numbers are on the older side. So if you are trying to figure out what test to get, I probably wouldn't start with these. 27, again, not sure if this is still a test that's offered. In my opinion, 27 was the easiest one. It was more of a confidence booster. This was in my opinion and the opinion of a bunch of friends and colleagues that I had. I did this test first because I thought, okay, lower number, probably less like the real test. But looking back, I wish I had done this test last just to give myself a confidence boost. This exam, step one, the USMLE step one and step two are all about confidence, especially this pass fail test. You can know a lot of content, but still fail the test, and you can know not as much content and still pass. So I think a lot of it's confidence in getting yourself through it. NBME 28. This one was very, very difficult. I got sick right before my exam, like I mentioned before, and I was already pretty stressed. But a lot of people I talked to also agreed 28 was pretty demoralizing. So if it's still one that's offered on the NBME site, I would consider doing it earlier so that way you don't scare yourself right before the exam. If you're like me and somebody that needs to get your confidence up. Again, the caveat to that is I had some friends that were absolutely crushing their practice tests, and so they wanted to take this right before the exam just to make sure that they could pass the hardest one. 29 and 30, I personally thought they were easier than 28, but harder than 27. I think that 29, 30, and whatever the new ones are offered on the NBME's website are going to be the most representative. They bring out these ones as the newest ones. So do the highest numbers on the NBME site closest to your test to really get a good understanding and maybe end on an easy note, just for that reference. So UWorld also offers two tests. The first one, when I took it, it was a half a test. It was not that hard, and in my opinion, there was way too generous of a curve. It's a good confidence boost, so I took it at the beginning of the block, and I think it's a good confidence boost going into the actual like dedicated period. The second exam, I didn't take this one. I was supposed to take it right before my step exam, and I heard some people thought it was so difficult. I even had a friend reschedule his test after taking it. So truthfully, I just didn't want to go through it, and I ran out of time to take it. So I didn't end up taking this one, but I had some friends that took it and thought it went fine. Amboss, you should definitely sign up for this. They give a free diagnostic test early in the year. It's completely free. You don't need an Amboss account, and it only takes a few hours. It just gives you a great way to know like what topics to review, what to focus on at the beginning. USMLE RX, I didn't take this because, I just didn't have time. I didn't want it to take a test that wasn't that representative. I had a couple friends take it, and they just used it as good practice to do questions. Free 120, I would definitely say to take this. This is the most representative. They're retired boards questions, and they'll be on NBME's site or something related. So usually I hear to take it within 7 days of the real thing. I think online a lot of people were saying to aim for 70% plus, but there's no real number I know of otherwise. I would just say do your best, because sometimes the questions can repeat on that test versus the real exam. So all this information is great, but what is it you really need to get that pass on your final score report? So unfortunately, this is pretty subjective. When you take your NBME practice tests, they're going to give you a percent chance of passing, unlike before where they gave you a 3-digit score. For me, being able to pass this test meant that I was scoring in the high 90s, although I was scoring in the high 90s, like 97 plus from the start of the dedicated period because I'd already been board studying so much earlier. I had friends that passed with a 99% chance of passing every time, and I had friends that passed with an 80 something percent chance of passing. I also had friends that passed who had never passed a practice test before. So it's really going to be up to you. I think the biggest thing is, when do you feel confident in your abilities to be able to take the test? You should be seeing an uptrend in your overall scores, and your school might give you a number to aim for. But when you decide to take the test is ultimately going to be up to you and when you feel comfortable. Again, for me, it was getting a high 90s% chance of passing and then really just calming down before the test and keeping my confidence going. All right, and now for some final advice before we wrap up this video. Please make sure to simulate your actual testing conditions when you take each practice test. That includes bathroom breaks, snacks, water, etc. I think you get about 60 minutes total break across your entire test, and you can split this up however you want. So I had some friends that did, 2-3 blocks back to back, then took a really big lunch break. I, on the other hand, like to take a break after every single block. So after every single block, I ran to the bathroom, grabbed a snack, ran back in. That meant my lunch break was about 10 minutes total. So figure out what you want to do and practice that way. They now allow water bottles at the testing center as long as you take off the label. So just make sure that you keep that in mind on your test day. The week of, make sure you take walks, you sleep, you do high yield stuff, and call your loved ones. Call anybody that keeps you grounded, doesn't stress you out too much. This includes friends, family, mentors, etc. And then finally, know what kind of study person you are. Are you a solo studier, a group studier, a parallel studier? So solo studying is when you like to study alone by yourself, nobody's around. Group studying is when you like to study with people, you like to talk with people about concepts, you like to bounce ideas off each other. Parallel studying is you like to study alone, but in the proximity and vicinity of other people, your friends, your study buddies. I'm a parallel studier, so I like to study by myself, but have friends close by that I can say hi to and feel that sense of camaraderie. And lastly, make sure to reach out to mentors in the class above you, at other med schools, people that have taken the test, even guidance counselors, just to make sure you feel supported throughout this time. Remember, there have been a lot of years of med students that have taken this Step 1 exam pass-fail, so be sure to reach out for help and guidance as you need it. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment down below if you have any questions. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content in the future. Bye and good luck!